Hello everyone, and welcome to the 5th and ultimate Start Create Cultural Change event. My name is Maria-Louiza Laopodi. I'm speaking to you from Thessaloniki in Greece, and I will be your host for this online event. This event is part of the START program. START is a capacity building and fellowship program for aspiring cultural managers in Greece. The program supports creative minds to kickstart cultural initiatives that generate a positive social impact on their local communities. This year is special to us, and not the least because of COVID-19, but because our program is coming to a conclusion. This year, the START program has supported again 30 cultural managers from Greece by offering a professional placement in 30 different sociocultural centers in Germany. 15 of those cultural managers have moved forward, and with the program support, they have implemented their initiatives in 9 cities around Greece until June 2020. Those cities are Kastoria, Thessaloniki, Komotini, Alexandroupolis, Athens, and in the islands of Tinos, Zakynthos, Nisyros, and Crete. From their original programming, a lot has changed, and many participatory activities have moved online with all the challenges that this has posed. But change is inherent to cultural and human development, and as we saw it through our work for the past 5 years, it can only happen if we decide to see things differently, if we collectively agree on shifting our perspectives. Based on the project's recent experiences, today's event is designed around the topics of adaptability and resilience in the sociocultural sector. Stay tuned, as our speakers will tell you all about it. You could also ask them any questions you wish by downloading the Slido app, either on Google Play or the App Store. The event code on Slido is #Z429. Enter the code and write your questions. I will take all your questions to my mobile phone and ask them directly to our speakers. So before we go into more details, I would like to welcome our international sign language translator, Spiros Kouzelis from SMILE. Creating an online event offers the possibility to more people from different locations to access the content. It is important for us that such events are also inclusive and welcoming to as many people as possible. So let me take you through the program. The fellowship celebration has been launched yesterday, and we would like to present and give you a glimpse of what START is all about. After this short presentation, we will continue with our lineup of speakers, and right after, we will open a fishbowl conversation with our fellows. As I mentioned before, you can participate in this conversation on Slido and via comments on the Facebook live stream. So without further ado, let me introduce you to our work. Now, I would like to welcome Christian Strob, Senior Project Manager of the Robert Bosch Stiftung, to discuss this year's impact and even further take you through the 5 years journey of our program and how we managed to shift our perspective and those of entire communities. Christian, welcome.
Hello, good afternoon.
So for the past 5 years, we have worked very closely in developing and running the program. We have shared happy moments and sad moments. Can you share with us a vivid memory of the past 5 years?
Yeah, sure. It's been an intense time with many lively moments indeed. But one impression I'd really like to share was the first project pitching session we organized back in 2015 with the first cohort of START fellows. We organized the session in Stuttgart at our headquarters, and this is a really nice place, but it's also, a very formal glass and steel building. So the mood in the conference room, however, where the pitching then took place, was really unforgettable. Actually, it was pure excitement, certainly on the part of the fellows who pushed each other energetically for their presentation, but also for the jury and the partners, as we weren't sure how this new format for us would work out in the end and what we would see in terms of projects. So in the end, the real results were amazing. And so was the farewell afterwards. It was very enthusiastic. We started with a glass of champagne with music and dance, and this continued throughout the years and was a great START legacy.
Yes, I confirm this was the case, and it was a great experience to be there. And so I would like to know what has START left as a legacy within the Robert Bosch Stiftung for future programs, beyond the drinks at the end of the session in Stuttgart, obviously.
Yes. Foundation, that's for sure. And although our focus areas have shifted due to the changing global environment, key ingredients of the program will resonate with future engagement of the foundation. I'm sure of that. Let me just name a few of them. Firstly, the collaborative nature of the program itself on all levels, on the team level, the partnerships, the other donors, but also, and most importantly, the networking and cooperation among the fellows. I think this was really important and will continue in our programs. And secondly, the adaptations and learning loops we implemented into the program, making each cycle improve over the years and offering better operations and input for the fellows over the years. I think this was really a good pilot for this type of program design, and we will hopefully continue in this direction in the future as well. Thirdly, and very importantly, I'd also suggest that the community-based approach on a project level, which allowed for large social culture network in Greece to grow and flourish, will be something to follow up in the future.
Okay, thank you very much. These are indeed three interesting points. So let's have a look together with everyone else watching from home. The impact of START in Greek communities since 2015. So, Christian, 150 alumni from all 5 years have shown an amazing passion and will to change things in their local societies. So how do you see projects, which are by default not meant to last, scale into something more sustainable?
Well, that's a very good question indeed. To my view, it is, first of all, very important to acknowledge the fact that projects are temporary by nature. And this doesn't mean that it's something bad, right? So projects, as we supported them through START, are, after all, manifestations of creative ideas seeking to change and advance our societies. And this has to happen at a certain point in time and a location. So depending on the resonance and also many other factors, the impulse given by a project or an initiative can grow into something bigger or larger, like an organizational structure, or a new community of practice working on a very informal level. For us in the START program, it was important to support both directions, and thus it is important in the end, I think, that if an initiative or a larger program for that matter comes to an end, that this doesn't mean that the impact created will cease to exist.
Yeah, I think it's a really nice approach. And before we move on, I would like to ask you, so how the Robert Bosch Stiftung perceives resilience. So one thing is sustainability of project, but there's also the part of the resilience.
Yeah, sure. To be honest, I'm no expert in resilience theory, and I'm actually very happy and glad that we have competent speakers tonight and over the next weeks, indeed, in our online talk series to introduce us closer to this concept and all its intricacies and notions. However, the larger topic around resilience, sustainability, and impact is certainly very important for our work on a practical level. As we just said, projects and programs are temporary structures, but the connections and the capacities of those people who move our societies forward are more lasting. So this is why we were focusing in START specially to build empowering structures for those change makers who will shape our futures for the better. At least that's what we hope. And yeah, let me just say that we are incredibly thankful for all those who joined us over the past years in this collective effort.
Yes, it's true. It is a collective effort. Thank you very much for joining us from Berlin, Christian. Now, so I invite all of you to follow the Foundation's work and that of our partners on social media, as many interesting open calls are on their way. You can find all the links on the startgreece.net website. So I would like to move on to the Scaling Awards. The Scaling Awards are what the START program offers in its third phase and are designed in a way to support those initiatives that have matured and are ready to move on and professionalize their efforts. The awards are offered by our Greek partners, the John S. Latsis Public Benefit Foundation, in the form of a €10,000 award, and the Bodosaki Foundation through hosting of each winner project for 6 months in Social Dynamo, a space for civil society capacity building, offering learning, professional support, and networking. Each year, the program provides 3 to 5 such awards, and this year, the jury has awarded 3 projects at yesterday's event. It has been an amazing moment, all the fellows and their teams have been waiting for, and I would like to welcome the winners. So, welcome Alex Dimitriou from the Sasman projects in Rhodes. Welcome Emanuele Vedianos, Clouds in Athens, and Maria Struba with the Kokounari project in Komotini. So I will start with Emanuele. How does it feel like to receive the START Scaling Award?
It feels good. It feels amazing, actually. I don't know what to say. I feel relieved. I feel that my work, got recognized in many ways. Yeah, it feels good to be here with you. I mean, I can remember the very first interview that I had in Thessaloniki, and I could never imagine, how the journey would be until here with all the people that I met, and getting the award. It means a lot.
Thank you. Are you, Alex, now a question for you. Are you optimistic about the sustainability of your initiative?
First of all, I would like to say that Rhodes was not mentioned in the whole islands, that the projects happen. So I would like to add Rhodes, where Sasman took place. So And now to answer your question, I think, I feel that after this, after getting an award, I think that the project will, pick up after all this, and people in Rhodes are really excited about us being here, and we want to continue offering this motivation and knowledge so that bike culture becomes stronger here. But it also would be great to be invited to other places and offer our knowledge and share our experiences with more communities. So we already have plans for this, we will collaborate with the Athens Municipal Makerspace, and we've been invited by a bike project in Athens to lead a workshop. So the secret, I think, is to remain local and at the same time to open up to new opportunities.
Great, that sounds like a good sustainability plan. Maria, where are you going to invest the award mostly in? So in what kind of, spending, let's say, or what are the resources you need more to spend the award in?
Hello. This is a question that I cannot say that I will follow to the total in the future, because I think that we have to stick on this very carefully on how we will spend the money. I think that I will try to spend in a way that it will be more fair to everyone, everyone that will work together will have something like a fair salary, or we will invest on good products that we will need. I don't know what else right now, but we will do a good plan, I think so.
Okay, and so with you, Maria, just this one last question. How important is this award during the COVID-19 crisis? Because it hasn't been an easy period for the past few months that all of you have done your project. So how important is this award now?
Yeah, it is. It's important, as we can imagine, even if the crisis of COVID exists or not. But this period that with COVID and zero waste, the tension to reuse single-use plastic is, I think the award will help the initiative and the whole thinking on zero waste more, to convince people that we have to change the way we are thinking and acting.
Yeah, I assume, and I hope it does. So I would like to thank you all as Scaling Award winners for sharing your experience and perspective on sociocultural work, and move on to our next session, which is the premiere of the Unlearning Talks, an online dialogue on how to develop resilience in changing environments and sustain sociocultural work in Southeastern Europe. While thinking how we would like to conclude the START program this year, we understood that a lot of the work that had been developed in the projects could be relevant to other areas in our region. Similarly, other projects could have a lot to share with our community. So we designed this series of talks to spread beyond Greece and Germany and in the Southeastern European space, as very often challenges remain the same when working towards sustainable cultural interventions. So the Unlearning Talks evolve around 3 thematic cycles. Cycle 1, coping with emerging crises, challenges and trends. Cycle 2, resilient models of sociocultural entrepreneurship. And cycle 3, building new collaborative methods of cooperation and networks. Each cycle spans over 3 days, from Tuesday to Thursday every week, starting next Tuesday, September 15th. Every day there's a different topic and a very rich and diverse lineup of speakers from Southeastern Europe. For more information, you can visit the startgreece.net website. In today's premiere of the talks, we wish to set the basic context of our theme, and this is why the first talks seek to deepen our collective understanding of the fundamental issues of adaptability and resiliency. 2 different approaches on how to navigate uncharted waters and adjust to continuous changes will be presented by 3 prominent speakers who will shed light on how to build a resilient system and incorporate futures literacy principles in the sociocultural sector. Right afterwards, the Q&A session with our keynote speakers will be in a fishbowl conversation format with the 2020 START Fellows to discuss their personal experiences in setting the building blocks of their resilient endeavors. Especially for this premiere, you as an audience can ask them any questions you wish by downloading the Slido app, either on Google Play or App Store. The event code on Slido is #Z429. So let me officially launch the Unlearning Talks and welcome everyone on the virtual stage. Our theme for this premiere is, and now what? The current relevance of futures literacy and systems resilience. It is not by chance that we chose this theme, not the least because we're going through a crisis, but because while the world is changing at an ever faster pace, cultural change has an amazing potential to create sustainable structures. And at START, we have seen firsthand how interdisciplinary approaches can develop new ideas and projects that affect people's lives. For the past 5 years at START, we have been supporting such efforts and hope to learn and share with our audience even more from this series of talks. I would like to welcome our 3 speakers for today. Riel Miller, head of the UNESCO Chair on Futures Research. Lina, Managing Director for Europe and the Middle East of the Global Resilient Cities Network, and Epaminondas Christofilopoulos, Head in Greece for the UNESCO Chair on Futures Research at 4th PRAXI. So let's begin with our first speaker. Dr. Riel Miller is one of the world's leading authorities on the theory and practice of using the future to change what people see and do. He's recognized as an innovative and globally experienced project initiator, designer, and manager. He's widely published in academic journals and other media on a range of topics, from the future of internet to transforming strategic processes. In 2012, he was appointed head of foresight at UNESCO, and he has been focusing specifically on the dissemination of futures literacy throughout the UN system and worldwide ever since. So, Riel, welcome to the Unlearning Talks series of the START Fellowship celebration.
Thank you. It's a great honor to be here.
Our virtual floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I want to start with just a little bit of funk. Can you hear me? You inspired me, and the whole START program inspired me. I found it to be really one of the wonderful examples of why Peter Drucker said, culture eats strategy for breakfast, which has to do with the proposition that the way we think, the way we see the world, the way we react to the world has an incredibly powerful effect on the kind of plans we make, but also the way in which those plans relate to the world around us. And so I'd like to start with the unlearning dimension here and point out that we have these very powerful, persuasive images in our heads of the future. And you know, one of the obvious ones, which is very familiar to everybody, is this kind of idea that the robots are coming, that we're in danger. The fear is a very powerful image in the stories we tell, and culture plays a huge role. And I was very intrigued and inspired also by the proposition that cultural experiences are transitory, But of course, they're thematic, and there are memes, and there are myths, and there are underlying narrative structures. The hero, the heroic story, the line that we use, the idea of progress, the way we imagine the future, and the images that we use, such as the one that you already pointed to, which has to do with climate change and the threat that climate change presents for humanity. These images, these ideas of the future influence very directly what we see. And the topic here that I want to try and unpack a little bit to set the stage for a discussion of resilience has to do with this very, it's something that we don't even question. And here I put up an image which reflects in the futures community something that's quite familiar and prevalent, which is the idea that we should be able to be very clever about the future. And Harry Seldon and Isaac Asimov, a very famous science fiction writer, presented us with a story. And that story was of how we could be so intelligent, so technically predictive, that we could use the idea of certainty and the ability to engineer the future to create a better world. In the case of Harry Seldon and Foundation, it was truncating the expectation in a fictional story of the Dark Ages throughout the galaxy. And the idea that a group of technocrats would be able to manipulate history in order to create the kind of breakthrough to reduce the Dark Ages in the case of Foundation. And what I'm trying to talk about here is that the way in which these stories, and here culture is obviously fundamental, the way in which these stories are carried and reproduced without us even questioning them, where we reproduce, in some senses, a pathology. We reproduce a kind of alienation, distancing, that actually bakes in, that continuously recreates a separation between humans and the world around them, and also the kind of abuses and oppression of racism, sexism, authoritarianism. These aspects of the world around us are not there just because somebody has a crazy idea or somebody believes in it very strongly. It's because they're part of the way we see the world. They're part of the way culture functions. And what I have perceived in this project, but also all around the world, is that as society and humanity becomes aware, but also gains the capabilities to have aspirations that, for instance, value difference, encourage diversity, but also realize the ability of humanity to extend what we do through tools which are symbiotic with us. In that context, it becomes really critical for us to understand our relationship to the future and the way in which the imaginary future, the stories we tell that are the future in the world today, influence what we see and what we do. So this is in a sense a basic attempt to get better at living with complex emergence. And I think this is not just a want to have, add-on. This is actually very fundamental, because if we can't live better with complexity, in fact, it means we can't live with our universe, because our universe is complex. It's not more complicated or less complicated. It's not faster or slower in some senses of the basic underlying emergence and evolutionary character. It's creative. Things happen. Experiments abound. Many of those experiments are completely incomprehensible to us, and we can't even perceive them. So the question becomes, how can we live better with this fundamental characteristic that in the present there is repetition, things that happen over and over again, and that we say, that's the same. That was the same as yesterday. All that concrete that we produce, all those roads, they're repetition, and they're going to be there for a long time. But there's also a lot of difference, and there are many different kinds of difference. And identifying those different kinds of difference becomes one of the aspects, one of the enablers of humanity to live more effectively with a universe that offers us this opportunity of creativity and novelty. So if we try and think about this, we can have, you know, some very simple ways of seeing the difference, like in this photo where we can see that they put the highway underground, or we can see where we had plans. Nobody could know before it happened that Brasilia would be built in this empty space that became Brasilia. But we live in this creative universe where conditions exist and ideas happen, and humans can use their imagination. Now, the future is only imaginary. And so thinking about the future requires us to be able to imagine different kinds of futures for different reasons. And that allows us to begin to think about the things that we already know and the things that we don't know. Changes that are inside the system that repeat from the past, but changes that are outside the system in the sense that they don't yet exist. We have no name for them. We don't have any way to make sense of them, and we can't sense them. So how do we get better at being able to cover the inside-in changes, the outside-in changes, the inside-out, and the outside-out? That's where futures literacy comes in. Futures literacy is not about doing one better or the other better. It's about understanding all of these and understanding also the relationships that exist between exogenous and endogenous change. So futures literacy is a capability, and it's a capability that is grounded, that originates in something that is universally accessible to all humans. All humans anticipate. We all have cried when we were babies to get fed. We all look to see if a car is coming when we cross the street. We anticipate. And in that way, we imagine the future. Now, becoming more capable of understanding where our imagination comes from, how our imagination is framed, what reason we're using to imagine. Is the reason we're imagining because we want to win the lottery? We want to know which horse will win the race. And we think about the future as only something that I can win. Or is there another way of thinking about the future, more orthogonal, more hallucinatory, more dreamlike, which says, how can I use my imagination to loosen the hold of yesterday and my expectations for tomorrow based on yesterday in the world around me? And that's where it comes, the idea of perceiving the anticipatory systems, beginning to understand the different ways and the different methods for imagining the future. The future does not exist in the present. Anticipation does. The form the future takes in the present is anticipation. And that's where it requires a little bit of work, where we have to think this through. We have to examine our underlying assumptions. We have to try and understand how those assumptions create the conditions, the parameters, the frames for what we imagine. We describe those imaginary futures on the basis of assumptions. And the particle accelerator here is the idea that we can make the invisible visible. We can be more aware of these two paradigms, anticipation for the future and anticipation for emergence, and we can walk on two legs. This is a phrase that was used by Mao Zedong, and it referred to the idea of actually the two paradigms, the worker's paradigm and the peasant's paradigm. And we all know that actually it's true that the perspective of people in the countryside and people who were peasants and illiterate and workers who were in the factories in the cities were very different. The cultural reference points, the power structures, the expectations were profoundly different. And what seemed shocking and almost unimaginable to one seems natural and normal and obvious to the other. So how do we reconcile these two different paradigms and work together in the sense of being able to encompass both the closed systems that are the preparatory, the contingent futures, preparing for a crisis, preparing for an emergency, the planning, putting in place a plan, and the open, what we discover, revealing what we did not know, we knew. New sense making and inventing the unknowable. And here's the creative capacity of humans that allows us to begin to go beyond simply reproducing what already exists, and to be able to take an approach which is less about colonizing tomorrow, trying to impose our idea of the future on the future, and acting as if we're the engineers of tomorrow. And if our engineering plan fails, we get very anxious, we're very stressed out, we're frightened, we're defensive, we're in despair, we are prone to conflict. We are prone to doing very bad things when we have that sense of failure and a lack of a future. But with futures literacy, we can begin to overcome this poverty of the imagination, to really harness our imagination in a way which changes what we fear and also how we create our hopes. And I put up this picture of the flat earth to point out that this is not easy, but that it's also very powerful. Meaning, if you have an image of the flat earth, you're frightened of certain things falling off the edge of the earth. When you learn that the earth is round, the things that you're frightened of change. But that's not something, a transition that happens overnight. And it's not a transition that has an obvious point of entry other than experiencing the power of thinking in new ways. And so this is why capabilities really matter. And the difference that a capability like understanding the world around us through experimentation and evidence and hypotheses and openness and embracing complexity is this kind of shift that we can see from the Ptolemaic system, where we thought that the earth was in the center and the sun went around the earth, to the Copernican system, where we know that the sun is in the center of our solar system and the earth goes around the sun. These kinds of changes, in a sense, they seem very abstract. They seem very theoretical. The fact that we know where the sun is does not change what the worker or the farmer will do, or the artist in the morning. They still wake up, they still have their coffee. It's still the sun rising because the earth is turning, and that's something that's constant, and in a sense is not changed by what we know. But in this context, and in the context of a program like START, where cultural transformation, where the cultural world is responding, and I heard in the video that I saw about START how people were inspired by defeat and by failures, how they were inspired by the struggle to become confident, the experience of collective intelligence, and the voyages that they were invited to take. And so this approach to saying, let's be more futures literate, let's understand the future as something that can be imagined for different reasons and in different ways, it changes what we see, it changes what we imagine, it changes what we resist, it changes what we preserve, it changes how we preserve what we want to preserve, and it changes the conditions of change. And just to make the comparison, everybody understands that if there's a society where people cannot read and write, there's one set of conditions. If people learn to read and write, there's another set of conditions. If people don't have a cell phone, that's one kind of world. If everybody has a cell phone, it's another kind of world. Changes in the conditions of change open up our imaginations. I cannot tell you what that world will be like, but I can tell you that if we take a capability-based approach to the world around us, if we move beyond this image, which comes from the artist Sampé, who shows this, in some senses, the folly, the craziness of this way of thinking, that we have engineering approaches and leadership that says, I'm going to get from underdeveloped to developed. I'm going to go from poor to rich. I'm going to go from uneducated to educated. And somebody will take me that way, and I'll go across the tightrope because they've got the plan, and the plan is the tightrope. This way of doing things, does that look very reasonable? Does it look like it's a very safe and kind of agreeable way to do things? I don't think so. And so that's why the idea here is that how we anticipate matters, the systems of anticipation that we use, our understanding of the role and the power and the nature of the future changes the present. It alters what we see, doesn't necessarily alter what we do, but before we can act and make choices, we have to understand the world around us. And the invitation to embrace complexity is fundamentally an issue of being able to create the conditions for a diversification approach to resilience. And here I want to end on the point about resilience. Resilience can be achieved in a certain way by building fortresses. You build a big castle, you put up your big walls, you defend yourself, you buy insurance, you do the things that will make you immortal. The pyramids in Egypt, it lasts forever. The other way of thinking about resilience, and it has a very strong underpinning in experience, is diversify. Make many bets. Some will fail, some will succeed, some will adapt. And that way we have a diversification approach to resilience, but there's also something related to diversification and resilience that embraces difference. It depends on creativity. And it also is not about permanency, because the diversification approach to resilience is part of transformation. It's not about preservation and making everything permanent and stasis. And in that sense, it's much more consistent. It's much more coherent with the universe that we actually live in. And therefore, I think there's less cognitive dissonance, and it's also more fun. So thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to speak at the Unlearning series.
Thank you so much. It's almost mind-blowing when somebody's trying to, grasp all the themes and the notions that there are in the futures literacy. Thank you for this very interesting presentation. I would like to invite you to take a seat on the virtual stage of the Fishbowl Conversation, where the two other speakers will join you shortly. So I would like now to welcome Epaminondas Christofilopoulos, Head in Greece of the UNESCO Chair of the Futures Research at 4th PRAXI. Epaminondas has a background in physics, environmental studies, international relations, and foresight, and experience in technology transfer and international research collaboration, coordinating several projects in Europe, Asia, the Gulf Peninsula, and Central America, while he has extensively worked in China for over 10 years. Epaminondas is responsible for the Teach the Future Hub in Greece, while he's a certified future strategist, vice chair of the Foresight Europe Network, co-chair of the Greek node of the Millennium Project, and member of the World Future Studies Federation. So Epaminondas, welcome. Your work is very...
Hello, thanks. Hello.
Yeah, your work is very much focused on scenario building and taking the theory that Riel Miller explained to us in action. In your presentation, you will show us some of these scenarios for our region in Southeastern Europe. And I wanted to ask you, what was the occasion for preparing those scenarios?
Thanks, and thank you especially for this amazing opportunity to talk about futures literacy and, of course, a bit about scenarios, and try to tell you a bit more about my idea how we can use the future to achieve resilience. I understand that the focus of the STAR project is to increase capacity of cultural managers in Greece and support them to kickstart cultural initiatives that generate positive social impact. Mm-hmm. So I assume that most of the people here with us today are related with culture and arts, and I will try to demonstrate why I believe you have a special role to play in achieving resilience. Mm-hmm. So Riel has very well presented everything about futures literacy and how we can use the future to achieve resilience and generate meaningful impact, especially during these bizarre circumstances that we experience. But let me first maybe repeat some things. I mean, I was scrolling some of the photos, some of the things I have found on the STAR website, and I was watching people hugging and people laughing and people hugging again. And I realized how different this is what we are experiencing today. We cannot hug, we cannot really laugh together. And we need to just deal with this situation that we are standing in front of our laptops and we try to replicate physical contact, but it's a completely different reality, a future that we couldn't see some months ago. So, I mean, Riel has really explained what futures literacy is about, but let me maybe repeat from my point of view and again, underline that futures literacy is a skill. It's a capacity that we all have more or less developed and a capacity that we can all improve. It's a capacity that helps us imagine the future in a more creative way, more open way, and we can use this capacity first to anticipate, to plan towards a specific milestone, towards achieving resilience, and of course, we can use this capacity to draw hope for emergence. I understand, at least from my point of view, that all this might sound a bit abstract, a bit naive maybe for some people. And to myself also as a physicist, during all my academic years, I was taught that in basic sciences, we have to develop theories, we design experiments, we build scientific instruments, and then we have to test and prove these theories. And any theory should be considered valid only if we can prove it through experiment and through observation. So I'm sure you have heard already the theory of evolution, Big Bang, or the theory of gravity. And you have heard also, I'm sure you have heard about pieces of evidence that confirm their validity. You have heard about fossils and DNA sequencing that provided proof for the evolution theory. You have heard about the expansion of the universe and the cosmic microwaves that prove Big Bang. And of course, you know about falling objects and planetary motion that have proved gravity. So in all these cases, still, and besides all this strong evidence in science, proving anything is actually impossible. What we can measure is only as good as the equipment we use to make these observations. So no matter how good are the observations, still there is always a limit how good they are. And if this is the scientific practice, generally, this is also the case in future studies. The main difference here is that the future doesn't exist today. So it's impossible to use any instrument to see it. The only way to see the future is through our imagination. And as in the case of basic sciences, in future studies, our ability to see the future is limited by our imagination. The better we imagine, the better we see the future, the more capabilities we see, and this is what futures literacy is offering. So the vast majority of the tools we use in our field are actually focusing on helping us to improve and unleash our imagination and use this in a systematic way. So I can reassure you that futures literacy is an ability 100% real, an ability that can have tangible results in our lives, in our careers, in our organizations. So if I go back to the focus of our theme, which is resilience, and although the connection appears to me very clear, let me highlight maybe what futures literacy has to do with resilience. Our ability to imagine the future was always, as Riel said, a primitive survival skill, and very often works quite well autonomously without any thought. We take an umbrella when we see the clouds. The first societies that have been gathering food supplies for the winter, so everything in most of the cases works quite well. But what when we have to deal with complex interconnected challenges like climate change, or when we need to survive in an oppressive society, or when something unexpected happened, like today with the COVID pandemic? These are some of the things, and many others are things that we have experienced this decade, these 2 decades, I would say, of the second millennium. We need to be prepared for the non-preparable, and we need to foresee the unforeseen. The world is changing, as Maria-Louiza said, rapidly and in great levels of complexity. So resilient strategies are a necessity for businesses, for policymakers, for individuals. And what better way to achieve resilience by anticipating future developments and be prepared for them? Well, while it is relatively easy to prepare for short-term linear challenges, it's far more difficult to be prepared for longer-term shifts in the social technical system or for the impacts of the exponential technological development and disruptions. So this is the reason why futures literacy and strategic foresight also are in vogue today, because they offer a sound approach to support the longer-term anticipation of alternative futures and for triggering responses to them. But also, and this is also very important, because they could help organizations and individuals to draw hope and navigate in the world with confidence. If I go to the things that Maria-Louiza mentioned about some of the things we have done on a local level, one of the cases was exactly, we built some scenarios. That was a project I started in the very beginning working with Lina when she was in Thessaloniki, and that was a case where 5 Balkan cities, including Thessaloniki, they had to deal and address the problem of air pollution. So the cities developed air pollution monitoring networks. They discussed and exchanged best practices. And what we did from our side was to help the cities think about the future in different ways. We explained that you cannot deal and address the problem of air pollution by only taking a very narrow view. You need to see the future of the cities with an open mind. Think of new technological developments that might happen, new social movements, new challenges. And at the end, what we did together with the cities is that we built 4 short stories for each city, each one presenting an alternative plausible scenario, hoping that will assist policymakers to feel that there is not one future for the cities. It's up to them and to the local communities to decide what is the future they want. Another example, and that is more working with the future literacy methods. And this was something we did in Lesbos with asylum-seeking unaccompanied minors. And we did a futures literacy lab. We used theater techniques, and that was the way we managed to express, to help kids express themselves, express their thoughts, their fears, and their hopes for the futures. And we work with them to free their imagination and draw hope. Now, there are some minutes left for my intervention, and I don't know if it's, or at least I hope that it was evident, the connection between futures literacy and your field of business, or at least I try to. But in our field, it's all about imagining, it's all about visualizing, it's all about communicating. And at the end of the day, these are the topics that you people thrive. We often seek for your tools, for your methods, theater, storytelling, design. These are the things that we use to set up participatory workshops and also to help people unleash their creativity and their imagination. So at the end of the day, after creating a common vision for the future, it is up again to you people to catalyze social change, to inspire, and to help the society envision a different future. Sometimes I also get the questions about how someone can be trained to become a future practitioner in our field, in the future studies. Of course, there are programs that you can learn methods and tools, but at the end of the day, what I say is that it's also about the talent of imagining, of asking uncomfortable questions, of having this kind of rare peripheral vision, of being able to understand the signals of change, to recognize what is important in our noisy environment. And I believe that these are actually the talents and skills that you people have, and you demonstrated in the START project and those initiatives. And this is exactly the superpower that you should use for helping us also and the society to achieve resilience. Thank you so much.
Epaminondas, thank you very much. I think you presented something that is very relevant, and it made a lot of sense in taking the theory into something more actionable. Thank you for your presentation. I would like to also invite you to the virtual stage to take your seat. We have plenty to discuss further, I believe. And I would like to present to you our next speaker, Lina Liakou. So she leads the resilient practice in Europe and in the Middle East for the Global Resilient Cities Network, working with the 21 member cities across the region in developing their resilience thinking through long-term city resilience strategies and actionable initiatives. So before joining the network, Lina was Deputy Mayor and Chief Resilience Officer for the city of Thessaloniki in Greece. And as a Deputy Mayor, she initiated collaborations with the European Commission, the European Investment Bank, and the World Bank. So prior to this, she was Chief Executive of the Metropolitan Development Agency of Thessaloniki, which is an inter-municipal company that coordinates national and international research projects. She's an architect and urban designer from the Bartlett School of Architecture in London. So Lina, thank you for joining us. I know that you are now based in London and wanted to ask you, just to start our conversation, how was the transition from the local work on resilience to the international level?
Sure. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. That's a great question. A short answer is it just increased my appreciation for all the people that work at the local level, because they really fight. They give an amazing fight every single day, and also what they do actually has a direct impact on the ground and to the citizens and the communities. So actually, me going and working at the international level actually helped me understand better how people work at the local level, because also that was I got a better understanding of how this happens in Italian cities or in Spanish Spanish cities or in the UK cities and etc. So again, thank you very much for the invitation. We are a global organization. We are a global network of cities. And we try to support our member cities, almost 97 across regions, to understand and operationalize resilience. So in this context, in the next 15 minutes, I will try to make the case of why resilience is important, and also try to give a hint of what are some frameworks, some tools and methodologies that can be applied in order to understand, assess, monitor, and strengthen the resilience of your city or your organization, your system, your community. And my main focus is a city, so it's the urban scale. But I think these kind of principles can also be applied at the level of an organization or a program, as the ones that your participants are developing.
Okay.
So why do we need to think about resilience? And I think the current health pandemic has showed us how vulnerable we all are, and how a crisis such as a pandemic, which is mostly a health one, actually can impact directly or indirectly the whole of our society. And the last decades we've seen an increase in the intensity, in the frequency, in the intensity, and the impact of this kind of different events. Whether this is forest fires, we see what is currently happening in the Bay Area in the US, whether these are hurricanes, but also how long-term stresses can actually trigger larger events or exacerbate the impact of big disasters. And an example is, for example, this kind of systemic racism. Again, I'm giving the example of the US, that we've seen how it exacerbates the impact of the current crisis, and how it can trigger additional kind of larger events. Now, in other words, resilience is not only about, let's say, the big disasters or the natural disasters, but it's also related to this kind of long-term stresses, chronic unemployment, lack of adequate infrastructure, racism, and lack of social inequality that are also need to be considered as this kind of slow burning disasters. Now, we can identify three main worldwide trends that together contribute into the fragility of our systems, and in this case of our urban system. The one is globalization, and by globalization I mean cities are more interconnected. System failure in one city actually can cause a problem in another, and a very basic example is what happened in Italy with the collapse of the bridge in Genoa, and how big impact this had for the local economy in Milan, or how a fire in a city can actually impact the air quality in another one. urbanization of risk is the second major trend, which means that the increasing density of population of cities leads to more people being exposed to natural hazards. And what I want to highlight here is that specifically vulnerable populations in cities are traditionally more exposed to risk. And the third big trend, and Epaminondas also mentioned that, is of course climate change. And climate change places new pressures in a variety of urban systems. Now, all of this together, in a sense, are kind of some main trends that can make the case for why potentially resilience is important and why resilience is important now. Now, I will try very briefly to go through, let's say, the origins of resilience, because in different disciplines, resilience might have different meanings. And in many cases, resilience has been seen as almost a conservative concept, because it has seen as, just going back to the previous status quo. The way that we approach resilience is based on the ecological and socio-ecological perspective. And I want to highlight two things. The one is, I take from the ecological perspective the ability of the system to absorb disturbance and self-organize. And I take from the socio-ecological perspective the powerful capacity of people to learn from their experiences and to consciously incorporate these learnings into their interactions. Based on these two, what resilience is and what urban resilience is for us, and at this point is a concept, the definition has gained popularity among different and global communities. Resilience is a dynamic concept, and it's where a system, rather than simply returning to pre-existing state, it actually changes into a new state, into a better state that is more effective into the altered environment. In other words, a city doesn't just respond to the disaster, but actually learns through it and consciously changes and becomes better. Now, let's try to understand resilience through a very, very simple story. This is actually a plant so in 1990s, the Toyota, the manufacturer, built this plant in northwestern Turkey. This was a plant built just very close to a fault line, very close to a seismic line. And their engineers were very proud because they built a very resilient plant. And indeed, as you can see, the plant didn't suffer any kind of disruption after the almost 7.5 magnitude earthquake that hit Turkey around in the end of 1990s. So for some perspective, somebody can say that this is a successful example of resilience. But what is important here is the city that was just next to it was devastated, was completely devastated. Almost 70,000 people died, 500,000 people left homeless. So this city, by definition, was not a resilient one. So the city was not able to resume function. Therefore, the plant also was not able to function, regardless whether it was just standing without any kind of problem. So what I want to say through this example is it is important when we think about resilience, to think about resilience of whom, resilience to what, and resilience of what. And the resilience of whom is important because for us, we want to put people, citizens, communities in the center of the resilience thinking. We don't build resilience for the sake of it. We don't build resilience for the infrastructure and only for the built environment, but actually we build resilience to safeguard the well-being of the people. Now, based on all of this, the definition that we use for resilience is the following: the capacity of individuals, communities, institutions, businesses, and systems within the city to survive, adapt, and grow, no matter what kind of chronic stresses and acute shocks they experience. So this definition, in a sense, incorporates all these different elements that we talked about. Now, how do we assess our resilience? How do we strengthen our resilience? How we build our resilience? And this is where I would like to introduce you to the city resilience framework. This framework was developed specifically to look at the complexity of cities and the core functions that contribute to building resilience. This framework, we call it the CRF, provides a lens through which the complexity of cities and the drivers that contribute to the city's resilience can be understood easily and by everyone. The CRF identifies 12 drivers of resilient cities. Collectively, we usually say that they represent the immune system of a city. What is important here is to remember that all drivers must be present. And although a weakness in one area might actually be compensated by a strength in another one. And altogether, they can be used to assess to what extent the city's resilience and try to identify the critical areas of weaknesses or of strength and try to understand how a particular project potentially can contribute to the city's holistic resilience. I will try very quickly to go through the different drivers. So first of all, the health and well-being. This is the basic, is how a city can provide for its citizens, for its inhabitants, its basic needs. Shelter, food, energy, health. The second driver is the economy and society. Again, it's the social and financial organization. Here we see the communities element. Here we see issues around social stability, justice, economic prosperity, which means providing economic opportunities for all. Then you have the infrastructure environment, which let's say is the traditional approach towards city resilience. It's the infrastructure, it's the different assets and the critical services, and how you ensure continuity in all of them. And last but not least, and usually this is one of the most critical drivers for resilience, is leadership and strategy. Is how we can ensure that we have an effective management, how we ensure that stakeholders and communities are part of the discussion, and how we can ensure that we have a data-driven, long-term, and integrated planning approach. Now, the CRF is an easy tool. It's not super analytic, and it's not super data-driven. What is important and the value of this tool is that it gives you quickly an understanding of the interdependencies of a system. For example, the pandemic, we can say that the entry point would be the driver around providing health and health systems. But actually, if you draw a line from there, you can connect with multiple other drivers that the pandemic has impacted, are elements that the city has shown strength and being able to respond to the pandemic, and others that the city failed to respond. This is the framework is also a quick way an easy way to communicate with others. And in Thessaloniki specifically, we use this as a participatory tool. So we use it to talk with seniors, to work with students, to discuss it internally with our different agencies, and again, very quickly make people understand about the holistic approach of resilience. Now, how do we know if we are building resilience? And this is where I would like to introduce you to one of my favorite kind of elements of resilience, which is the resilient qualities. A resilient system exhibits certain qualities that enable them to withstand, respond, and adapt more readily to shocks and stresses. Sorry, I skipped a slide. And these are the 7 qualities, and you can use them almost as questions as you design your own program or project. For example, is this reflective enough? Which means, do you have the processes in order to learn of what is happening, critically assess what has happened, and take this learning into, as you design, for example, the next phase? Is this robust enough? Does it mean that it doesn't break? It limits the spread of a failure? Is it flexible at the same time enough? Can you have alternative strategies as you are designing, for example, a program? Is it integrated enough? Do you allow for the different systems of a program, of an organization to work together? Is it resourceful? This is one of my favorite qualities. Can you easily repurpose resources, repurpose processes, repurpose assets? Does it have redundancy? This is also critical to resilience. Does it have backup capacity? If something fails, do you have another way to perform the same action? Is it inclusive? Do you engage with broad stakeholders? Do you engage with a community that you impact or you are impacted from? So, to sum up, what is important is, 1, to understand the complexity and interdependency of risk. We cannot think about a stress or a shock as a thing that just hits at a certain point. We live in an area, in a time where we need to think about the compounding risks. It's a heat wave, along with the pandemic, along with the social unrest, along with the data breach, and this is what makes a city resilient. And this is the capacities that we need to build. The second element is that this CRF actually helps you understand the capacities of the system. What are the different elements in order to have the system, actually to be able for this system to function properly? The qualities help you understand how do you survive, how do you adapt, how do you grow? It helps you answer these questions. And in the end of the day, what is more important is to understand the resilience, again, of what, resilience to what, and resilience for whom, and taking a people-centered approach in this. So I'm going to share with you the CRF in case you want to actually dig deeper or actually use it as we design your projects. And thank you very much.
Lina, thank you very much for explaining to us the resilience system and what you're doing. And I must admit that this bubble system seemed to me really, really relevant to any kind of project and the projects that we've been developing. So thanks again for your presentation. I'd like to ask you to join Riel and Epaminondas on the virtual stage. And so let's continue to the fishbowl conversation now. Here is how it works. Our speakers are seated in the chairs on stage, and there is an additional empty chair next to them. All our START fellows are seated around the virtual stage and will move their avatars in the empty chair on the right of the stage to ask questions. So let me remind you once again that you can participate in the conversation by sharing your questions or comments through the Slido app. As I mentioned before, you can download the app either through the Google Play or through the App Store. The event code is #Z429. And you can pose your questions by posting them on Slido, and I will convey them on your behalf to the keynote speakers. And we have already quite some traffic, so please continue sending any questions. And now let me welcome our fellows of this year. And I am sure, dear fellows, that you have plenty to exchange with the speakers. But please allow me to start with a couple of questions myself, because as I said, it's really, really interesting. So my first question is addressed to Riel Miller. Riel, you have explained to us what is futures literacy and how it affects decision-making for humans and at policy level. In the START program, we have been building up capacities for cultural managers, and in turn, they have been building capacities for their communities through innovative use of arts and culture. How can this special capacity, futures literacy, be introduced in programs like ours or those of civil society organizations who tackle practical, everyday problems?
Thank you very much. That's an excellent question. It's interesting to think about this from the point of view of capabilities and to make the comparison to reading and writing. In other words, let's say, and it's pretty obvious, that you would expect that when a community learns to read and write, that it would be able to do things that it could not do before. But of course, we all know that if you're going to introduce reading and writing, it will take time. It's a generational thing. And the capabilities of a young person who learns to read as a child and somebody who learns to read as an adult will be different. So the issue here around futures literacy is really one of thinking about scaling it up over time and understanding that initially people will be very unaware of some aspects of how they use the future and why they use the future. And in particular, I think the issue of the cultural side of things, which says, for instance, strange or artistic or iconoclastic images of the future, ideas of ways of presenting the future. Well, we don't have time for that because we're in a panic about some crisis. At a practical level, what we've been doing at UNESCO is we've been running futures literacy laboratories. These laboratories are on the ground practical experiences where people learn by doing. And by starting out that way, very gradually, we begin to illustrate and empower people to themselves have their own futures, their own idea of the future, but not only as some utopian or ideological target, but also as something that says, you know, let me just give you a very banal example. When a person falls in love, it can be all of a sudden, it can be over time, but when they fall in love, their idea of the future changes. And that idea of the future changes what they do in the present. And then if you fall in love and you stay with the person, you also learn continuously that what it means to love somebody changes. And that's one aspect of the idea of futures literacy here, is that our idea of the future is not fixed, that it needs to be fluid, it needs to change. And I would even include here something which I think is uncomfortable and difficult in our societies, which is mortality, which is that things end. The experiments and even whole systems and ways of living and being come to an end. And sometimes, you know, that's tragic and we miss it. Sometimes certain things come to an end, let's say women not having rights, and that comes to an end. Women can have a bank account, and the old system comes to an end, and it's gone, it's over. So when we do futures literacy at a practical level, developing it through learning by doing and collective intelligence on the ground, people become aware of things that they can let die, things that can disappear. They become aware that their imagination is not just about choosing the horse that will win the race so they can be winners. And this is a very profound change, but it takes time to diffuse throughout the society, in the same way that learning to read and write would take time to diffuse throughout society. So we have to distinguish at the practical level that you were talking about, the different stages and steps of becoming a more futures literate, more creative community, more comfortable with complexity. But it starts by doing. It starts by organizing people on the ground. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, you've answered very well, and I really liked your example with love because it's really practical. I mean, it relates to everyone, I guess. Thank you so much, Riel. I would like to ask a question to Lina. In your presentation, you explained to us the city resilience framework, and I was wondering in which of the 4 areas of drivers do you consider cultural work to fit best, if at all? I mean, if there is one that fits best, better than another one, or can it be a horizontal power? And actually, how can cultural organizations at the end of the day help cities solve long-term social pressures?
Thank you. That's a good question. So if we want to be very frank, the urban resilience practice hasn't, or until recently, hadn't shown enough attention at the cultural sector. And this is obvious because if you see the CRF, there is no actual mention of culture. That doesn't mean that actually through the work we did with our cities, that cities themselves identified culture as an important element. They either connected it through a specific PRAXI, let's say, driver, and I think creating cohesive communities, even issues around social justice and economic opportunities. I think this, we might say that this is closer to culture, but in the end of the day, the best way is to see culture through a more holistic approach and actually try to connect it almost with all 12 drivers of the CRF. And I think you can do it, whether this is related to the built environment, the natural environment, or more importantly, stakeholder engagement, effective leadership, which is super crucial.
Okay, thank you very much. I had the impression that it can actually relate to various drivers, but it's clear how you explained to us. Thanks a lot, Lina. And I would like to ask a more local and maybe practical question for Epaminondas. You have experience from the region and you have been working on scenarios, as we just heard you say, for different cities, including Thessaloniki, Nicosia, Skopje, Sofia, and Tirana. So how are these scenarios affecting decision-making at local level? I mean, you gave us the example of air pollution. And what do those forecasts reveal for the cultural sector? Maybe there is no such direct connection, but for us it's important to understand, from a different perspective, how those scenarios affect decision-making.
Thanks, excellent, thank you. Let me take just a few seconds just to what Riel said about using futures literacy and say a few words about another project we are working together with UNESCO and a few big ports and the Climate Kick platform. And I mean, ports are very stable, very old-fashioned organizations. They resemble like banks, and what they do is they expect that always they're going to transport goods and products with the same way. So what we do, and we try to change the way they see the future on a system level. So it's not only about futures literacy on individuals, but how an organization can change the attitude towards the future. And this is what we do on a practical level, working together with Riel and UNESCO and Climate Kick and some ports in Greece and in other cities in Europe. Now, as regarding scenarios, which is a quite traditional method in strategic foresight, by using the scenarios, and especially in the case of that project, it was actually to demonstrate that you cannot discuss about air pollution if you don't consider the world system, as the future can evolve in different ways. So we can have electric cars, maybe a new strong ethos combined with conscious consumerism, or new energy sources, or new economic models that could change completely the linear projection of what we see today and project this to the future. So it's up to us to work together with policymakers and expand this vision of the future. So this is what we do with the scenarios. And what we did in that case, we built 4 short stories. We had a young woman, an immigrant, that was the key character in these stories. And we also considered some uncertainties, how open will be the society, if we're going to have the same economic model or the economy will be completely transformed. So if I go also the second part of your question about where is the cultural sector in these scenarios or in every scenario, I would say that as openness of the society was identified as a key parameter, not only in our scenarios, but in many scenarios. Your activities and initiatives, like those supported by START, are substantial towards the direction of openness and for building this new ethos of a society more concerned towards environment, towards human rights. So what future we're going to see, it's very much related with the work done within initiatives like the initiatives you are supporting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There is a lot of openness, I believe, or at least there is experimentation with it in all kinds of cultural projects. So now I would like to maybe invite fellows who wish to join the conversation to just move their avatar in the empty seat. So I see Athina Kyorpelidou. Athina, please.
Good evening. Thank you very much for all your interesting talks. My name is, as Maria-Louiza said, Athina Kyorpelidou, and I'm from Castoria and the project Behind Closed Doors, a project that empowers women facing gender-based and domestic violence in my city. Several times during the past challenging year, I had to convince myself to keep working for my project, facing obstacles and ever-changing circumstances. But this is a project I truly believe in, and it doesn't take much for me to get right back on my feet and keep going. Although my question is partially answered, I would like you to elaborate a little bit more on how do I keep my team and community engaging with me over time for our cause, especially in the social field where change is most of the time slow and results not always easy to measure. Thank you.
So are you addressing this question particularly to one of our speakers?
Well, I heard about the resilient policies and I was thinking perhaps,
Lina?
I don't know. Yes, Lina, it would be nice, I think.
Okay, Lina?
Thank you.
That's not an easy question. One of the main, let's say, values and principles of the work we are doing, especially when we are working with the local authority, and I will describe the example of the local authority, and I think you can think how this kind of adapts to your own situation. One of the main principles of building this kind of resilient strategy and resilient roadmap is how you ensure you engage with your communities. And for a city, what is important is how we ensure they engage with communities that are not usually, the traditional actors that participate in, the active citizens that usually come to the different kind of events or when somebody asks for something, like an open call, but actually how you nudge these communities that don't even care what the city does, or they don't follow the news, or they don't even know who the mayor is. Which means that you need to alter your process. You need to alter the methodology. You need to alter the way you talk, even the narrative. Especially for a city, this is very important to alter and change the narrative and the discourse. The second kind of important kind of value here is that it's not just engage them at the beginning, to understand what are their problems, but actually how you keep them around the table from understanding the problem to actually implementing the solution and all the different phases in between. Because at least from the local authority perspective, there is a tendency to include citizens at the beginning, and then when the project is starting to be implemented or even start the design, they just they forget about them. So I don't know whether any of this for you makes sense. Try to understand. Great, thank you.
So thank you very much. Thank you very much for your answer.
Okay, thank you very much, Athena. Maybe another fellow, I see Stella Anastasaki joining the stage. Stella, please. So let's try in a moment. Maybe there is a sound check. Maybe we can.
Can you hear me now?
Oh yes, now we can,
okay.
Stella. Thank you. So Pericles will wait.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for the inspiring talks. I'm Stella Anastasaki, based in Thessaloniki, and the past few years I've decided to focus my energy in developing inclusive practices aiming to enable the accessibility of people with visual impairment in the experience of getting in contact with art and culture in general. This was further developed and elaborated this year through the START Capacity Building Program, and we managed to render accessible part of the museum space in the collection of the Moments Museum of Contemporary Art in Thessaloniki. As you can all imagine, developing inclusive tactile applications in a period that do not touch was our new reality, was a big crisis that we needed to overcome fast and with efficiency. And no one could have expected that such a pandemic would strike. So as it hit us in our soft spot, as we say, there were many challenges that we needed to deal with in order to keep this going. So my question has two parts, and is the following, and is addressed to everybody. I don't know who could answer this. Taking into consideration that coronavirus is still spreading and the cultural and the social sector has taken a great hit these past few months, even museums are cutting personnel or ceasing their operations. What is your opinion and advice related to the resilience of newly introduced initiatives that haven't been already established or formed? Is it a good idea to proceed with the formation of an initiative that is focused on the field of socioculture at the moment, since all these obstacles do exist? And what is usually the factors that we, the new project managers, usually do not consider when we are assessing risks before the initiations of our project? Thank you.
Okay, so who would like to take this question?
I can give a little thought on it,
yeah.
including the question, I think, of motivation.
Mm-hmm.
And how to create a sense of hope needed to engage in activities that at first glance seem to be impossible, but then when we try and find other ways to do them, generate an alternative image of the future. One of the wonderful things that I think is happening now is that instead of global or distance being a relationship of the far away coming to the local, so people going to a theater from more or less far away, or people in a meeting like this one coming from different parts of the country or different parts of the world to a particular place, we're now, the local is coming in directly from anywhere, and you can be local and global in a completely different way. This opens up a potential for changing the relationship to investment in time and in carbon, and offers a kind of provocation. Do we compromise and give up on what we care about? Meaning, okay, we're going to have video relations, we're going to have telepresence, and it's going to be superficial and meaningless. Or do we say, not at all? The challenge here is to be inventive and to recreate what we care about, but not necessarily in the same form. And we can see that historically, this is very often the case, is that initially it looks like we're going to substitute one thing for another. And in technology, because they're tools, and tools are things that humans use, if we use the tool in one way and we get a new tool, we tend to use the new tool just like the old tool. So the famous example from economics is the typewriter and the computer, where the computer replaced the typewriter, but in fact it was a nightmare for many, many people. But then 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years later, the typewriters disappeared, but also the way the typewriter was used has disappeared. In other words, we no longer use the computer the way we use the typewriter. And I think this is true for drama. I think this is true for painting. I think this is true for poetry. I think this is true for emotion. I did a very little taste by putting a little bit of Prince at the beginning of my talk, because we don't yet have the etiquette. We don't yet have the rituals. We don't yet have the politeness and the symbols and the familiarity that allow us to make the richness that's possible from connecting as we are now fully realized. And I think that's a huge opportunity and challenge for cultural managers, for artists, but for the community as a whole. And I think it's embracing that hope and creating it collectively that is one of the keys to motivating people and getting them to realize that they can imagine hopeful futures if we can overcome our poverty of the imagination. And in that way, understand that there is huge potential right here and now, not necessarily in building monuments or always making things that are classic or evaluating ourselves on the basis of fame and durability, but rather through the experience of the moment and the meaning it gives us in an ephemeral, lived sense. And this is an expansion, in fact, of where meaning comes from, and it enlarges our conception of how life is art, and art is life.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Riel and Stella. So who would like to come next? I see Valentina. Valentina Socratus, welcome on stage, please.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Valentina, and I'm the project manager of Emerge, where we created a pop-up participatory museum nurturing mental health in the city of Alexandroupolis. My question is, although it's partly answered, where do we draw the line in using digital cultural products as our main engagement tool, even in the era of confinement and social distancing? Of course, we should be flexible and able to adapt and fast, but how can we sustain our line of services without losing our identity? If we are forced to use only digital means, especially when a whole brand relies on holistic and experiential methods, emotional connection, and hands-on participation, suddenly it feels like our strongest tools lose their impact. Thank you. And I think Mr. Miller is the person to answer my question, just to continue the previous one. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Valentina. And it's a wonderful question. And look, I think that again, what we need to I think understand is that what was customary and normal for my grandparents is not necessarily customary normal for my children. And what I mean by that is that when we used to, this was a while ago, when we talked about Facebook, they said, well, those people can't really be your friends. And of course, it doesn't have the same meaning. But that doesn't mean that we can't distinguish in different ways. So let's think of dinner parties, okay? We all go to different kinds of dinner parties. We go to formal dinner parties, we go to friend dinner parties, we go to birthday parties, we go to family parties. We have all these different kinds of parties, and we do them in different ways, and we have different expectations. And what it seems to me is we're presented with here today is an invitation to differentiate, to become more discerning, to become more alert to the qualities that distinguish different types of relationships. And instead of investing in a kind of monoculture, everybody must come to the cinema, everybody must go physically to the museum, or the opposite, we should only be doing it virtually. What we have here is an opportunity to think about augmented reality, virtual reality, spontaneous connectivity, smart mobs, pop-ups, as you mentioned, and in that sense, expand the vocabulary of human interaction, to increase the ability to be ourselves and to find different ways of expressing ourselves in different contexts. And it also, it seems to me, provides us with an opportunity to keep the past alive, but not just in the way of a monument that has been anointed by the government and say, this is the monument that everybody must believe in, but in fact to create legacies that relate to each of us. In augmented reality that becomes recorded, we're going to have the possibility to leave traces, legacies of all kinds. But we're not experienced with that. And we also have this idea that we should make things that are immortal. Whereas one of the greatest gifts is to no longer be a weight on future generations, to liberate them, to be confident that future generations will do their own thing. So all of this, I think, is very, very exciting and makes for a huge opportunity. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, and if I may, one of my first thoughts, and I agree with what you said, is how do we find the funds? Because augmented reality is expensive. Or I believe in using multiple and different tools in multiple and different means, even if up close or by distance. But for me, what better works is the combination of all of that. So if suddenly you are deprived of half of them, do you still do the same job?
Look, it's a crucial question, and I have to, this is so I put my economist's hat back on, and one of the things is that value, the way in which we define value, things that are valuable, the value of your relationships. So there's a challenge today, I think, which is pretty obvious, and maybe it's even one of the biggest challenges of our time, is that financial capital is only one way of thinking about value and capital as something that has value over time. But there's natural capital, there's human capital, there's social capital, meaning the ability to recognize that the intergenerational learning that is now possible because, for instance, schools are closed, is something of huge value. I was just having a conversation this morning about with a large multinational corporations saying, how can we create incentives for our employees today? They're not impressed by getting an extra car or by having an extra gym pass. And I said, well, the children are at home now. What if the benefit in today's world is to help with homeschooling, to create new ways of adding value in context, in the community? And I think that relates very much to the kinds of projects that you're managing in this project, because they are about bringing the community together to identify things that have meaning and value for you. And you're absolutely right that many of those things don't have money attached to them, but that doesn't mean that they aren't about the quality of life and the quality of well-being.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Valentina and Riel, for taking on two almost questions. I would like to, just before Greg, we move on to Greg, just give me some time to move on to a Slido question. And it's coming from a member of our audience, Ilias Kastritis. And I would like to ask this question on his behalf to Epaminondas Christofilopoulos. He's asking, how could plausible scenarios influence the strategic choices of Greek organizations?
Well, thank you. Well, I mean, I can bring many examples in this discussion. I mean, we live in Greece, and you live in Greece, and we can see some strategies that some political decisions that take place every day, that there are obvious problematic. I mean, we have an ongoing discussion for many decades now about the retirement system, and that is not possible to finance it on the future, and we make discussions and we take decisions, and after a couple of years we realize that still these decisions are not enough. We are living in a reality that demographics are changing, artificial intelligence probably is going to change also the jobs in the next years, or other technologies like autonomous driving. So it's up to us to open our minds and the various ways that the future is going to change. It's up to us to question these policy decisions and ask for better and more open-minded strategies that will take into account all these changes that they are not hidden, are here already. We can see them. So scenarios are going to play or try to play this role. And of course, scenarios alone cannot change the minds of policymakers. We need to collaborate with people like you to create this common vision. So after we create or after we find ways to discuss and open our minds to the future, then it's up to us to work together with you people, to be together, to work together for this common vision and build a strategy, a resilient strategy to achieve this future. So scenarios is just one tool, it's not a panakia, but this is what it's about. And what we have done so far, we also use different techniques. So we have used scenarios, but then what we did sometimes is that we took those scenarios and we built serious games. So we ask the policymakers to play a role-playing game so they can actually experience this scenario, because what is difficult is to become emotionally engaged with the future that it is presented in the scenario. So we try to use techniques. Playing games is one technique to be emotionally engaged. Do other things also. So yeah, I don't know if it was clear or I tried to draw some light to your question.
Thank you very much, Epaminondas. I'd like to take another question from Slido towards Lina this time. How do we advocate, says the question, for more investment in sociocultural work as part of pandemic stimulus and recovery efforts linked with economic and health recovery?
So I think what is important to be able to articulate is what is the direct and indirect impact that the investment will have and how it will support. So it's actually both being able to, make the connections, even if from the first kind of thought they seem very far-fetched, but actually being able to trace the impact and trace, who will be positively impacted, and then being able to actually articulate how and how many. And that's the biggest challenge, of course. And we know it is a challenge, especially, if you need to put numbers, but you need to be able to show that you have an understanding of how many are being positively impacted. And it doesn't mean, financially positively impacted, but actually, how you improve the well-being of the communities, how you improve the physical environment or the natural environment of the city. So again, being able to understand how your own action can have this kind of ripple effects and being able to articulate that, well, maybe this will help as you articulate why it makes sense for this investment to be included into the COVID recovery. In general, I think COVID has shown us that especially the social and economic fabric of the city has been massively impacted. And we also have seen the focus around social cohesion and social equity. We see that as a priority. We're talking about a just transition, whether this is climate, around economic opportunities for all. So I don't think that, when we talk about economic recovery from COVID, we mean no social cultural projects. I think on the contrary, it has been elevated as important priorities.
Okay, thank you, Lina, very much. So I would like to get back to you, Greg. Hadjiioannidis, your question, please.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for this very interesting talk. I do have a question. I'm Greg Hadjiioannidis. I forgot to introduce myself, and I'm the creative director of Nisirio, a project about developing creative and sustainable practices to live with the plastic waste on Nisyros Island. I have a question to address to Lina, although I was thinking of something else to ask, but I admit that I was very much surprised hearing that culture is not part of resilience strategy or a resilience city strategy developing. The past years that I've been working in the cultural sector, I thought that the main skill I developed is becoming resilient. The past year that I am in the socio-culture sector, I thought that I grew this even more. I admit that I'm very much surprised that culture is not part of, and I really wonder why.
So just to clarify, what I said at the beginning is that in the urban resilience practice, culture, at least traditionally, hasn't been at one of the priorities, let's say, or the main kind of entry points. And I'm talking about, like even 10 years ago or when the CRF was created. From then, we saw, as we worked with each city, especially with the cities that had a very strong cultural, base and community, and it was important economic also sector for the city, that culture was elevated into an important sector, and it was integrated into the strategy. And this made us also rethink how we need to think about culture in the context of urban resilience. And we actually did a program with the British Council that actually tried to understand this element, having as a case study the municipality of Athens and Ramallah in Palestine. And from then on, actually, the British Council was able to even scale this up. But it was not from the beginning at the center. It was elevated as actually the work was happening within the cities. And you can say, you can say a lot of things why this has happened, because mainly resilience was seen from a very economic and infrastructural perspective, and it was a miss. But I think, what is important is to recognize the weaknesses also of the approach and being able to rethink about that as we move forward.
But how does this change when talking about rural places? Because I'm very much focused in these small societies living in Nisyros, a society of 900 people. This is a huge discussion that we may have whenever possible. I'll be very happy to. However, this last thing, is it the same or completely different, or does this apply to rural areas as well?
It can be applied it can be applied in a sense in every system, because the backbone of the approach is the systems approach, and the city, we see it as a system. So therefore, an island, especially in your case, the island by itself is a very interesting system. So you can trace and understand the resilience based on the system of the island. And also there is a whole other practice that is around island resilience specifically. And I urge you to look up.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Greg, and thank you, Lina. So I see Pericles moving in. Pericles, welcome on stage, and please share your question.
Greetings, everyone from Thessaloniki. I'm Pericles Hatzinakos, manager of the Commons in Residency project. In the context of the project, we developed 4 different pillars, referring to the creation of a green building into a typical, the transformation of a typical flat building into a green one through participatory actions. And in general, as I told you, we developed 4 different pillars, which I will not refer to because the project was high scale, let's say. Thessaloniki is not a resilient city, but I know that efforts have been done in order to shape a strategy. Last period, I was making research about the resilience strategy, and I realized that the strategy didn't include, let's say, opinions by daily people, the daily life people. My perspective was like reading opinions came out by the active citizens, let's say. And as the discussion developed, we should construct new terms to describe how the future could be. And Lina, I will address, and also I would like to share with Lina that I was inspired by her speeches and during the pre-election period to develop my project. Lina, you told that, first of all, strategy and leadership is one of the most effective parts of constructing a resilient strategy. And today's local government of Thessaloniki doesn't have as a priority to continue that effort. At least it seemed that it was not a priority. First of all, I would like to ask you if the resilience in general and the strategies to be followed have to be made by following a top-to-down approach. And secondly, you referred to that into the construction of the resilience strategy, you have to question what to what, of what, resilience of what to what, for whom. And I would like to question by whom. Isn't it the by whom element very important? The participatory processes must be somehow spread to the society in order to construct a strategy.
Okay, so you posed a lot of issues and a lot of questions. So I will try to take them one by one. First of all, thank you for the feedback. I think feedback is always welcome. The resilience strategy of Thessaloniki, which I led, was the first actual holistic planning process that the city had ever taken. It was not perfect, and this makes sense that it cannot be perfect, but it was the first attempt, and it actually left a legacy within the administration that you know, we see how it has been used, even if the current administration doesn't have, you know, climate change or resilience or this kind of more holistic approach as a priority. But there is a legacy and there is an institutional knowledge that was created and until now and was spread within the agencies of the city. The second element is, I mean, we went to almost, I think, 15,000 people out there. We went to people that had no idea who the mayor was. So I don't agree. I will disagree with your point that we engaged with the usual suspects. We actually consciously tried not to, and that's why we try to be very creative in how we go beyond, you know, the traditional workshop-y kind of thing. So we went to the elderly centers, like we tried to engage with people that were never even considered doing. Now, the element that one of the biggest challenges for building a resilient city, and you know, the strategy is just a vehicle, it's not the end. The important piece is how you build resilience and you institutionalize resilience within a city administration or within a city. The strategy is just a roadmap. One of the biggest challenges is continuity in the face of political transition. We've had in the network almost 70 transitions. a lot of them were successful, which means that the new administration actually built on the previous one. Some of them took time, and let's not try to predetermine even the current one, because it takes time for administration to understand what they need, what are their assets, and what actually can help them at what can't. I agree that the political transition is a difficult element. This is why it is important to ensure that what you do is connected with the other also stakeholders within the city. In our case, we worked a lot with the academic institutions, we worked a lot with other municipalities, we worked a lot with other organizations, such as the one that Epaminondas is leading. And still there are a lot of organizations that, continue the work or even use the resilience strategy as a baseline when they design new projects or they apply for EU funding. And I really know that this resilience strategy, even if the mayor doesn't want to say that publicly, is being used constantly when especially building programs and funding for COVID.
Okay, thank you very much for your question and your answer, Periklis and Lina. Who is next? Let me see. I see Christina Christoforou, Livani. Welcome, Christina, on stage. Please state your question and to whom you're addressing it to.
Thank you very much, Maria-Louiza. Thank you very much, everyone. And I can express how honorable it is to be digitally among all of you today. So I'm Christina, and I've been the project manager of Tok, which is a project implemented in Zakynthos, where we try to explore ways to dismantle different forms of oppression collectively. So when you think of oppression and when you work on dismantling oppression, there is a key word coming in your mind, and this is inclusion. And when I think of inclusion today in Greece, I can't overlook of the unfortunate incident in Moria, where the camp was burned a couple of days ago. And speaking with all of you about resilience today and social resilience, I would like to raise a question regarding the asylum seekers, so many thousands of people in Greece and in the EU right now. And my question is, when we dream of this future, when we try to imagine anticipatory scenarios, what are the fears and what are the hopes? When we think of these people that they've been stuck and living in dehumanizing conditions for so long, how will they be ever integrated in our communities? How can we actually make our communities inclusive, and what will be the roles of these people that they experience this and that every hope or every dream they have has actually disappeared? Thank you very much. If any of you wants to answer, it would be an honor.
The first try. Thank you for the question, which is a very important one. I think one of the issues here is the words tolerance and the words kind of the integration or assimilation or diversity are very difficult ones. That we're facing a situation in today's world where the need to understand difference and the ability to understand difference is relatively limited. And it's in part because the proximity, it's in part because of the mobility, it's in part because of the way we construct our social relationships in our communities. And I think that there's a really very basic challenge to humanity today, which is what I referred to previously. It's not, for me, the question of imagining some utopia where everybody's kind to everybody else and where somehow everybody is happy because we have decided that this is the way for people to be happy. The issue here is a more difficult one, and in some senses one of greater maturity for our species. Our species does not display great maturity. It does not display a great capacity to appreciate the foundations for resilience and transformation, which is difference and the sources of creativity. So I think it's a question here of cultivating and developing those capabilities. And in fact, I mean, Nondas might want to comment on this. We did a Futures Literacy Lab on the island in Lesbos, in which we worked with young people and used theater as a way for to cultivate their ability to imagine. This doesn't address the problem of people's fears of each other, of the fear that we have of difference, of the way in which we think difference is a problem or a threat. Whereas difference is the source of resilience. It's the source of transformation. But this is a very fundamental and powerful shift that in many ways goes in against the experience of industrial society, the experience of scale economies, the experience of national homogenization, the creation of national languages, the creation of national identities that are the dominant ways of thinking about the world today. So we're very distant, I think, at the moment from being capable of genuinely moving beyond the fears and the hopes of a very narrow way of thinking of what it means to be human. But there are ways of making that practical, and it sounds to me like your project about being able to identify those differences that make people frightened and helping them to overcome their fears is exactly what we need to do.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christina and Riel. And yes, Mark now, I see, yes, welcome on stage. Please, Mark.
Hello, everyone. So I'm Mark from the project Generation Symbiosine, which is a community of people who act in natural spaces through art to reconnect humans with the rest of the living world. As a project meant to be run horizontally, which was not really the case in the past few months, and in the spirit of transformation rather than preservation, as Riel brilliantly put it, and I agree very much. I am wondering what would be the best tools to put in place, in your opinion, so that the project can last in time without depending on a one-person leadership.
You want me to try an answer to that one?
Sure.
Well, I think that there's always chemistry and chance, and I think open source is also crucial. In other words, allowing people to take it and change it and make it their own becomes fundamental, and that's where again this comes up against the scale economies issue and the homogenization and the credit system. Oh, I had 1,000 hits, I had 10,000 hits. This is my project, etc. So it is, I think, a question of design and the design principles that we follow to create something that stays alive by being let go of. And so this is also true, I would say, for the point about transformation that you raised, which is that I can only say that we're in transition. I don't know what the transformation is. I mean, to me, that's the definition of transformation. You cannot know in advance. And so here it's an issue of making it meaningful so that people can make it their own. After that, it comes alive. And by the way, it walks off and goes in a different direction, and it's no longer yours. So to me, that's the way to make something dynamic and living. I don't know if that really answers your question, but it's the kind of attitude that I like to take.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, so thank you, Riel, and thank you, Mark. I would like to move to a Slido question from our audience. And with that, I would like to close our fishbowl conversation. The question is, I sometimes wonder why we need to even imagine a future that will not become real. And I would like to ask you for a comment, each one of our keynote speakers, to close this beautiful conversation and evening.
If I could just say a sentence, I mean, it sounds very depressing not to imagine at all, or do not imagine the future. I mean, maybe it's one of the most beautiful things to do. I was doing different things in my career until the last, I don't know, 6-7 years, when I focused my work on imagining the future almost 24 hours a day, and I'm really having a splendid time. And it doesn't show, but yeah, I mean, for me, it's the best way we can, and all the good things that happen in humanity is through imagining the future. So yeah, I rest my case.
Oh, okay, are there any other comments from Riel or Lina?
Just two things. One, I mean, what is important is to understand the present and understand also, you know, what are the big trends, what is happening, and try, you know, it's not a matter of like predicting of the future, but it's actually, you know, what, especially in resilience, you build resilience and it needs almost a generation to actually, you know, strengthen a system or strengthen a city. Therefore, you know, you cannot build it for today. It doesn't make any sense. It's gonna just be obsolete. So, you know, by necessity, you need to understand these two elements. And the second, which is very practical, today the European Commission published a report, which is strategic foresight for resilience in terms of recovery from COVID. And it actually highlights the importance of foresight in building the resilience of the continent and how, you know, we need to do that. Which I think also it will give a different kind of push, both into the resilient kind of space and into the foresight.
Lina, thank you very much, and everyone. And I would like to just state that this fishbowl conversation format was a really interesting one for us, and it gave us the opportunity to give the floor to many more voices and open this conversation. And I'm also very happy, and I'd like to thank our audience for posing the questions and giving us more you know, content to discuss on. So I would like to thank once more all of our speakers for joining us and participating at this fishbowl conversation. It has been a real pleasure having you at the event, and we hope this conversation has inspired you as much as it has inspired us. Also, thank you, dear fellows, for your contributions. I wish you all the best for your future endeavors and congratulate you once more on your work for the past year and the impact you have managed to create amidst challenging times in your local communities. Your experiences can act as inspiration for other people's dreams, as we heard from our speakers. So I invite our audience and thank the audience for participating through the Slido app to stay tuned as we're going to show more of your work now. So as we're getting closer to the end of today's event, I invite you to watch the short documentary Try and Error by Antonios Vallindras, alumnus of the program. Antonios and his team have traveled to all project cities and captured moments, feelings, and thoughts. And during the 20 minutes documentary, you will have a chance to watch our 15 fellows are in their natural environments. You will see how their actions through the program have shifted the perspective of their communities. The documentary is in Greek with English subtitles. Please enjoy.
Το Start Create Cultural Change διένυσε μία περίοδο 5 ετών, όπου χρηματοδότησε 72 project τα οποία προσπάθησαν να φέρουν την κοινωνική αλλαγή μέσω της τέχνης και του πολιτισμού στην Ελλάδα. Χρειάζεται κάποια στιγμή να βρεθείς μόνος με τον εαυτό σου και να πάρεις τις αποφάσεις για τη ζωή σου. Μέσα από την αποτυχία γεννιέται μια ευκαιρία και το start είναι μια ευκαιρία για να δοκιμάσεις.
Έβλεπα ότι σε μια χώρα που πραγματικά ο κόσμος δεν είναι καθόλου ευαισθητοποιημένος, οι προσπάθειες ευαισθητοποίησης εστίαζαν περισσότερο στην ενημέρωση. Δεν είναι όμως ενημέρωση που δεν έχει ο κόσμος, είναι ευαισθησία. Και νομίζω ότι γι' αυτό και είναι απαραίτητο στην Ελλάδα να βρούμε πολύ πιο ανατρεπτικούς τρόπους να ευαισθητοποιήσουμε τον κόσμο. Έτσι ανακάλυψα το start.
Σκέφτηκα ότι θέλω να υπάρχει ένα μέρος που να μπαίνω μέσα και να περνάω καλά. Και αφού δεν υπάρχει αυτό το μέρος ή εγώ δεν ξέρω, μπορεί να υπάρχει και μην το ξέρω, αλλά τέλος πάντων σκέφτηκα να το φτιάξω εγώ αυτό το μέρος. Και γενικά θεωρώ ότι αν κάτι σου λείπει, αντί να γκρινιάζεις ότι δεν υπάρχει, φτιάξ' το.
Κάνε κριτική, κάνε δεκτή κριτική, αλλά τι αντιπροτείνεις, ρεαλιστικά. Όχι και καλή ουτοπία γιατί σε βοηθάει να προχωράς. Αλλά ρεαλιστικά, όταν μένεις μόνο στην κριτική, δεν μπορείς, θεωρώ, να προχωρήσεις. Ειδικά όπως έχουν διαμορφωθεί οι συνθήκες της κοινωνίας σήμερα.
Αυτή η ερώτηση δεν ξέρω. Κοίταξε, η αλήθεια είναι ότι για μια περίοδο 2 ετών πριν ασχοληθώ με το start, είχα εγκαταλείψει. Είχα ιτηθεί βασικά. Είχα ιτηθεί από την Αθήνα, είχα ιτηθεί από την τοπική αυτοδιοίκηση της Αθήνας και είχα χάσει λίγο όλη την ενέργεια που είχα και φεύγοντας να δημιουργήσω κάτι πολύ πιο απλό, μια τουριστική επιχείρηση η οποία ασχολείται με τον εναλλακτικό τουρισμό, στον οποίο πιστεύω πάρα πολύ, σιγά σιγά άρχισα να καταλαβαίνω ότι καλό αυτό, αλλά δεν με γεμίζει καθόλου.
Ζηλεύω τους ανθρώπους που έχουν ένα στόχο και κάνουν ένα πράγμα και ασχολούνται με ένα πράγμα και μόνο αυτό αγαπάνε. Γιατί εγώ δεν μπορώ να το κάνω. Εγώ κάνω πολλά, γιατί αγαπάω πολλά πράγματα και εγωιτεύομαι από πολλά πράγματα. Αλλά νομίζω ότι και για να πούμε ότι κάνουμε κάτι καινούριο, θέλει λίγο και αυτό το τσαλαβούτιμα σε διαφορετικά πράγματα. Δηλαδή, αν πηγαίνουμε με τη μία ταυτότητα την στάνταρ, είμαι καλλιτέχνης και αυτό σημαίνει ότι είμαι καλλιτέχνης. Άρα, ξέρεις, δεν ασχολούμαι, ας πούμε, με την κοινωνία, δεν ασχολούμαι με το community κτλ. Τότε δεν θα είχαμε και το socio-cultural. Έτσι δεν είναι?
Νομίζω ότι κάπως ένιωσα μέσα από το start ότι όλη μου η διαδρομή μέχρι στιγμής, όλα τα μικρά πράγματα που έχω κάνει σαν εμπειρία ή σαν εκπαίδευση ή σαν επαγγελματική διαδρομή, κάπως κλείνουν μεταξύ τους, σαν όλα τα κομμάτια του puzzle να κάνανε κλακ και να νιώθω ότι τόσο καιρό προετοιμαζόμουν γι' αυτό.
Βρίσκομαι λοιπόν το Σεπτέμβρη του 19 μαζί με άλλους 29 νέους πολιτιστικούς διαχειριστές από όλη την Ελλάδα στη Γερμανία.
Και ξέρεις, την πρώτη μέρα πας και βλέπεις, ας πούμε, αγνώστους. Αλλά κάτι υπήρχε εκεί πέρα ανάμεσα. Δηλαδή, δεν ξέρω πώς μπορώ να το ορίσω αυτό το κάτι. Ίσως πεποιθήσεις, ίσως υπόβαθρα. Δεν ξέρω ακριβώς τι είναι. Δεν το έχω αναλύσει. Αλλά μπορείς να το αισθανθείς ότι υπάρχει κοινός τόπος.
Σε μένα το start, αν κάτι έδωσε περισσότερα από όλα, περισσότερα από τα 10.000, περισσότερα από τη Γερμανία, είναι ότι γνώρισα 30 ανθρώπους που δεν ήξερα ότι υπάρχουν στην Ελλάδα. Πήγα και ήταν αυτόματο το ότι, όπα ρε φίλε, είμαστε από τον ίδιο πλανήτη.
Και ποια είναι η ταυτότητα που θέλεις να φτιάξεις?
Αυτή είναι δύσκολη ερώτηση. Νομίζω είναι κάτι που φτιάχνεις κομμάτι-κομμάτι. Είναι αυτό που σου έλεγα. Υπάρχουν άνθρωποι που θα πάω και θα συστηθώ, ή ας πούμε τα μουσεία, οι συνεργάτες που θα συστηθώ ως Φραντζέσκα, ως υπότροφος του ΣΤΑΡΤ, ως εκπαιδευτικός ή επιστήμονας. Και υπάρχουν άλλα άτομα, όταν θα έχω να κανονίσω στο χωριό, στα οποία θα συστηθώ και θα πω ότι είμαι η κόρη του Καρουλιού, του Αγγελάρα η εγγονή. Η ταυτότητά μου είναι ένα κράμα. Έχει να κάνει με κομμάτια από τον τόπο μου, με τα βιώματά μου, αργότερα με την επιστήμη μου, αλλά είναι αυτό το αποτέλεσμα, ο συνδυασμός τους.
Πώς με άλλαξε. Κοίτα, ήταν πολύ δυνατή η εμπειρία. Καταρχάς και μόνο το να βρεθείς 2 μήνες σε ένα περιβάλλον που κάποιοι σε φροντίζουν, σε προστατεύουν, υπάρχουν όλα τα μέσα για να έχεις εσύ τελικά την ελευθερία να δημιουργήσεις, αναπτύξεις, σχεδιάσεις το project σου. Είναι μια δυνατή εμπειρία και είναι μια ευκαιρία που δεν δίνεται πολύ συχνά. Είναι το απόλυτο περιβάλλον, το ιδανικό ρε παιδί μου περιβάλλον για έναν δημιουργικό άνθρωπο. Να μπορέσει να συγκεντρωθεί μόνο στη δουλειά του χωρίς να τον απασχολεί οτιδήποτε άλλο.
Και νομίζω ότι αν στην Ελλάδα υπήρχαν αυτό που παρήχε σαν μια δομή και σαν φιλοσοφία το START, υπήρχε σαν μια γενικότερη φιλοσοφία μέσα από κρατικά προγράμματα και κρατικές δομές, θα ήταν πολύ διαφορετικά τα πράγματα.
Το START ήταν ένα πλαίσιο, ειδικά η πρώτη φάση, που με έκανε να νιώσω πάρα πολύ ελεύθερη. Πάρα πολύ ελεύθερη.
Άσχετα με όλα αυτά τα 12-13 χρόνια εργασιακής εμπειρίας, ήρθε και μου έδωσε την αυτοπεποίθηση το ότι μπορώ να δοκιμαστώ και σε άλλο πλαίσιο. Ότι μπορώ να μεταφέρω τις ιδέες μου μπροστά από μια κριτική επιτροπή, ότι μπορώ να προτείνω μια ιδέα που ειλικρινά πιστεύω ότι μπορεί να φέρει κάτι καλό, ότι μπορεί να φέρει μια αλλαγή και ότι είναι ο δικός μου τρόπος να δείξω στον υπόλοιπο κόσμο το ότι υπάρχει και αυτός ο τρόπος να γίνονται τα πράγματα.
Νιώθω ότι αναγνωρίζεται σιγά σιγά αυτό που κάνουμε. Και αυτό φαίνεται και στον οικονομικό αντίκτυπο, απλά δεν είναι ακόμα εκεί. Δεν είναι 100% βιώσιμο. Αλλά θα γίνει. Συνέχεια νιώθω ότι κάνει βήματα προς αυτή την κατεύθυνση. Το START ήταν ένα πολύ μεγάλο βήμα προς αυτή την κατεύθυνση.
Είχα σκεφτεί πολλές φορές το πώς θα διαχειριστώ την πιθανότητα της αποτυχίας μέσα σε αυτό το πλαίσιο. Νομίζω ότι δεν έχω ιδέα, ενώ δεν έχω φτάσει καν να σκεφτώ πώς θα μπορούσε να γίνει αυτό. Γιατί πρώτα απ' όλα απογοητεύεσαι εσύ που έχεις επενδύσει χρόνο και ενέργεια και μετά έχεις και την ευθύνη όλων των ανθρώπων που έχεις γύρω σου και φοβάσαι ότι θα απογοητευτούν.
Η γενικότερη αποτυχία με φοβίζει πάρα πολύ. Ξέρεις, με το να τα έχεις δώσει όλα. Και νομίζω το έχω κάνει και πολλές φορές, δεν είναι η πρώτη φορά που το έχω κάνει. Κάθε φορά αυτό που έλεγα που δοκίμαζα αυτά τα διαφορετικά πράγματα για να δω αν μου κάνουνε, νομίζω ότι έτσι το έκανα πάντα. Τα έδινα όλα και το έβλεπα στο τέλος. Η αποτυχία με τρομάζει πολύ. Με τρομάζει ιδιαίτερα τη συγκεκριμένη στιγμή που νιώθω ότι έχω βρει αυτό που μου ταιριάζει και αυτό που είμαι καλός και αυτό που θα ήθελα να κάνω.
Μέσα σε όλο αυτό το ταξίδι που έγινε το τελευταίο εξάμηνο και παραπάνω μέσω του START, είδα κι εγώ δικές μου πτυχές που δεν τις είχα αντιληφθεί ή τις ψηλιαζόμουν. Αγχώνομαι πολύ. Θέλω να είναι όλα στην εντέλεια. Το ήξερα, αλλά τώρα ήρθε και έδεσε. Δηλαδή,
απόγινε. Γι' αυτό είπα και πριν ότι θέλω λίγο ηρεμία, να τελειώσει, να έρθει μια ανακούφιση, να χαλαρώσω. Και κατάλαβα επίσης ότι μπορεί να έχω όλη αυτή την ενέργεια, αλλά πολλές φορές δεν πιστεύω στον εαυτό μου. Δηλαδή, ναι, τώρα συγκινούμε κιόλας, δεν μπορώ. Τώρα θα αρχίσει τα ζουμιά. Ρε παιδί μου, εγώ θέλω να κινητοποιώ τους άλλους και δύσκολα κινητοποιώ εμένα. Με την έννοια του ότι πιστεύω, αλλά μέχρι να γίνει, ρε παιδί μου, βγάζω το τσιγκέλι. Αμφισβητώ συνέχεια τον εαυτό μου. Του βάζω συνέχεια... Πρέπει να το κάνεις τέλεια, γιατί αλλιώς δεν αξίζει. Δεν μπορείς να έχεις αυτή την εικόνα, να λες αυτά και να μην τα κάνεις. Αυτό είναι πολύ βαρύ.
Το start ήταν αυτό πάρα πολύ για μένα. Το start με έκανε να κάνω μία παύση, έτσι, να κάτσω λίγο πίσω και να δω τον εαυτό μου τι κάνει όλα αυτά τα χρόνια, πού πάει, ας πούμε, τι στόχους έχω βάλει, πώς θα τους κατακτήσω, πώς θα μπορέσω να φτάσω βασικά, να κάνω τα πράγματα που θέλω. Και το έκανε το να μην σκέφτεσαι κάθε μέρα την οικονομική σου προσωπική βιωσιμότητα και να μπορείς να κάθεσαι, να τρέχεις ένα project που σου αρέσει πολύ και να σκέφτεσαι όλη την ώρα νέες ιδέες με τους ανθρώπους, με τους συνεργάτες σου, με την ομάδα σου, την κοινότητά σου. Ήταν μια πολυτέλεια που δεν την είχα. Δεν την είχα ποτέ μάλλον, μέχρι τώρα.
Δες εδώ τι απαλό, δεν είναι σαχνούδι να θες να το ακουμπήσεις.
Ότι αξίζει να κουραστούμε γι' αυτό. Και εμείς τώρα που πιστεύω ότι είμαστε και πολύ τυχεροί που μπορούμε να φτιάχνουμε ένα τέτοιο narrative, ας πούμε, για τον εαυτό μας και για τη δουλειά μας και για τη ζωή μας. Ότι, ας πούμε, η δουλειά μας είναι να προσπαθούμε να ζούμε καλύτερα και να προσπαθούμε να κάνουμε την κοινωνία, ας πούμε, να κάνει 2 βήματα πιο μπροστά στο να ζούμε πιο αρμονικά και πιο κοντά ο ένας τον άλλον. Είναι πολύ σημαντικό.
Αυτό που κυριαρχεί είναι ευγνωμοσύνη. Πολύ μεγάλη ευγνωμοσύνη. Και χαρά, μια χαρά. Όσο κουρασμένη και να ήμουν κάποιες φορές, ξύπνησα το πρωί και ήμουν με χαρά για αυτό που συμβαίνει. Παρόλο τα προβλήματα και τεχνικά που είχαμε, γιατί αλλάξαμε αρκετά τη δομή του project, λόγω όσο συνέβησαν το προηγούμενο διάστημα. Αλλά πολύ μεγάλη ευγνωμοσύνη, πολύ μεγάλη ευγνωμοσύνη για όλους.
Υπήρχαν μέρες και υπάρχουν και θα υπάρξουν που λέω ότι τι τα ήθελα, καλά ήτανε, μια απλή δουλειά έπρεπε να βρω, να έχω ήσυχο το κεφάλι μου, 3-4 να σχολνάω, Σαββατοκύριακο να είμαι ελεύθερη. Αλλά κάθε φορά όταν φτάνω στον τερματισμό είναι τόσο μεγάλη η ικανοποίηση που παίρνω βλέποντας αυτή την τρελή ιδέα να γίνεται.
Σίγουρα έχω αλλάξει πάρα πολύ με το πώς ήμουν πριν πω στο start. Είμαι πιο χαλαρή και ξέρω ότι ωραία πράγματα θα συνεχίσουν να συμβαίνουν στην ιδέα και το όνειρο που έχω. Γιατί πριν το start ήταν απλά κάτι που αιωρούτανε. Ωραία.
Τώρα που μπαίνω στο κόσμο το ότι μπορείς να κάνεις πράξη αυτό που έχεις στο μυαλό σου, έχω χαλαρώσει αρκετά.
Γιατί άμα δεν έχεις ελπίδα, άμα δεν νομίζεις ότι τα πράγματα μπορούν να αλλάξουν, δεν ασχολείσαι. Ή αλλιώς έχεις κουραστεί, που δεχτώ. Μπορεί σε 10 χρόνια να τα πω διαφορετικά. Να πω, έχω κάνει τα δικά μου, προσπάθησα. Τώρα στο κάνει κάποιος νεότερος. Αλλά είμαι ακόμα νέος, οπότε όση ενέργεια μπορώ να προσφέρω στην κοινωνική αλλαγή, και προσφέρω.
Είτε πετύχει είτε αποτύχει, εγώ θα είμαι καλά. Εγώ θα είμαι ok. Γιατί αν αποτύχει, δεν θα είναι γιατί δεν προσπάθησε.
Είναι πολύ σημαντικό να κρατάς το δικό σου νόημα, το δικό σου γιατί και να προχωράς να πορεύεσαι με αυτό. Όταν ήμασταν στη Θεσσαλονίκη στο kick-off, μας έκανε εκπαίδευση η Στεφανία και με κάθισε κάτω και με ρωτούσε γιατί το κάνεις και γιατί το κάνεις και απαντούσα και μου λέει δεν είμαι χρηματοδότης, τα πήγα στα χρήματα, γιατί το κάνεις βρες, όπου έφτασα στο σημείο να πω ότι ο μπαμπάς μου είναι αγρότης και κτηνοτρόφος, η μαμά μου καθαρίζει σπίτια και εγώ είμαι σήμερα εδώ μία από τους 15. Αυτό το προσωπικό το βίωμα, αυτό το προσωπικό το κίνητρο και αυτό το κράμα από τα διάφορα κομμάτια μου είναι ο λόγος για τον οποίο το κάνω. Δεν έχω να αποδείξω κάτι, δεν έχω να λογοδοτήσω κάτι, τίποτα σε κανέναν. Με την έννοια την προσωπική, το βαθύ, το αίτιο. Το γιατί να το κάνω αυτό το πράγμα ή αν το κάνω ή αν το έκανα καλά. Τις προάλλες είχα αυτή την ανησυχία και το συζητούσαμε και μου λέει «Μαμά μου, είχα για έξυπνη». Αυτό που πας να κάνεις δεν το έχει κάνει κάποιος άλλος. Επομένως, με τι μέτρο σύγκρισης θες οποιοσδήποτε και οποιαδήποτε που θα το δει να το συγκρίνει. Είναι κάτι καινούριο. Βήμα το βήμα, φορά τη φορά.
Κοίταξε να δεις, τα τελευταία 2 χρόνια κάνω την άσκηση να ζω χωρίς προσδοκίες. Η οποία δεν είναι εύκολη, αλλά κόβει το φανταστικό. Με βάζει λίγο σε μια πιο πραγματική κατάσταση, με γιώνει. Δεν είναι εύκολο, δεν το πετυχαίνω πάντοτε, αλλά το δουλεύω σκληρά.
Μαθαίνεις. Βρίσκεις ρυθμό μαζί με τους υπόλοιπους. Πάλι οι υπόλοιποι παίζουν ρόλο. Είναι κάτι που δεν μπορείς και αυτό να το κάνεις μόνος σου. Μπορείς να μάθεις, να αντιμετωπίσεις τέτοιες καταστάσεις μόνος σου. Χρειάζεσαι κι άλλους γύρω σου.
Και πώς έμαθες να τους εμπιστεύεσαι?
Θέλει χρόνο. Θέλει να αφαιθείς λίγο ελεύθερος, να τα αφήσεις λίγο να μπουν οι άλλοι μέσα, να δούνε το όραμά σου, να δεις και εσύ το δικό τους, να κάνεις στην άκρη τον εγωισμό σου και να δεις πού θα συναντηθείτε. Αυτό είναι το πιο σημαντικό, το να μάθεις και εσύ να λες όχι σε κάτι που μπορεί να θέλεις πολύ, αλλά να γίνεις σοφός μάλλον, να καταλάβεις ότι μπορεί να γίνουν καλύτερα πράγματα, ρε παιδί μου, όταν θα συναντηθείς το μέσο με αυτούς τους ανθρώπους, όταν και το δικό τους όραμα σε ένα βαθμό θα καλυφθεί και το δικό σου. Αν θες μόνο το δικό σου, και όλη την ώρα θα ζητάς το δικό σου, δεν θα γίνει, σίγουρα.
Νιώθω σαν ένα παιδί που η οικογένειά του το προστάτευσε και του μάθε πράγματα και τώρα ήρθε η ώρα να ενηλικιωθεί και να αναλάβει τις ευθύνες του. Όταν λοιπόν ενηλικιώνεσαι, έχεις πάρει κάποια εφόδια για να βγεις στον κόσμο. Νιώθω ότι έχει έρθει η ώρα να βγούμε στον κόσμο.
Ο Εμμανουήλ προωθεί την κουλτούρα των κοινών στο αστικό τοπίο της Αθήνας. Η Μαρία εκπαιδεύει παιδιά, γονείς και εκπαιδευτικούς για τη δημιουργία του πρώτου Zero Waste νηπιαγωγείου στην Κομοτηνή. Η Φραντζέσκα ενέπνευσε τα παιδιά της Τίνου να δημιουργήσουν τον πρώτο πολιτισμικό οδηγό του νησιού. Ο Γκρέγκ εισήγαγε δημιουργικές και βιώσιμες πρακτικές, με σκοπό την ανακύκλωση και επαναχρησιμοποίηση πλαστικών σκουπιδιών της νησίρου. Η Βαλεντίνα δημιούργησε ένα pop-up συμμετοχικό μουσείο στην Αλεξανδρούπολη, που πραγματεύεται τη φροντίδα της ψυχικής υγείας μέσα από την τέχνη. Ο Περικλής πραγματοποίησε παρεμβάσεις για την αντιμετώπιση της κλιματικής και κοινωνικής κρίσης στη Θεσσαλονίκη. Η Στέλλα στην Θεσσαλονίκη οραματίστηκε ένα πρόγραμμα για την προσβασιμότητα ατόμων με οπτική αναπηρία στην εμπειρία της τέχνης. Η Αθηνά στην Καστοριά ανοίγει διάλογο για την έμφυλη βία σε τοπικές κοινότητες και ενδυναμώνει γυναίκες που έχουν υπάρξει θύματά της. Η Δανάη δημιούργησε έναν χάρτη του κέντρου της Αθήνας μέσα από το γυναικείο βλέμμα. Το Άλεξ δημιούργησε ένα project για την κουλτούρα του ποδηλάτου και τα DIY Feminist Makerspaces στη Ρόδο. Η Χριστίνα ενδυνάμωσε τους κατοίκους της Ζακίνθου μέσω της αφήγησης και της δημιουργικής γραφής. Ο Μάρκ στην Αθήνα επαναπροσδιορίζει τη σχέση του ανθρώπου με τη γη μέσα από την τέχνη. Η Ειρήνη κινητοποιεί και ενδυναμώνει την γυναικεία κοινότητα στα ελεύθερα Κρήτης. Στην Θεσσαλονίκη, η Μυρτώ καλεί τους οδηγούς να αλλάξουν οδηγική συμπεριφορά και η Άρτεμις εμπνέει τους εκπαιδευτικούς να φέρουν αλλαγές στα σχολεία τους.
Thank you for being with us in today's special event. See you all in our next session on Tuesday, September 15th at 1600 hours European Eastern Time with the first cycle of the Unlearning Talks. If what you heard today sounds interesting, stay tuned for our upcoming cycle, Coping with Emerging Crises, Challenges and Trends. Because 14 amazing cultural professionals from all over Southeast Europe will share their perspectives and experience with you. I invite you to share your story by registering at our events page in the startgreece.net website. Until then, stay safe and join us on social media.